Well, hello and welcome to the developer track day 2. So for this morning, we are starting off on a little bit of a less technical note. This presentation is entitled uh, Strategies for Successful Project Execution. And as we are on the developer track, this is going to be a little bit more on the tech, like software side of projects, but these tips and processes can really be applied to any internal or external project for your company. So I've kind of broadened it a little bit so we can kind of take this in stride and see everything that we can do with it. So, developer experience. Let's get into it. Before we get into everything, I'm just going to set a roadmap for the next hour. We're going to first define what we even mean by what is a successful project, because if we don't know what success will look like for what we're trying to achieve, then we will never know if we actually get there. Next, we're going to go through these next two are kind of grouped together: project planning and project execution. What are the different best practices and the best delivery methods and frameworks depending on your team size, depending on your time frame? We're going to go into each of these and what to do, what not to do, and how to best not get fired. And then the final portion of this presentation will be on project communication, not just what we're doing when we work, but how we're communicating while we do it, because I'll share some stats a little bit later, and we'll see that if we don't do things right, then we might not be able to do it at all. And then I don't suppose we'll have much need for a Q&A, but we'll probably have a little bit of time at the very end for some Q&A if y'all would like it. All right, like I mentioned earlier, first we need to start at the very beginning. What do we even mean? What is a successful project? Well, when we talk about this, we're gonna first, when we're talking about software, we can look at the traditional iron triangle when it comes to software development and software engineering. And we have three different things that we're looking at: is what is our scope? How big is our project? Where are we going with it? What's the cost? Because we all want to keep our costs down. And then how much time? Time and cost kind of go together, and they all kind of come to the point of how big is our project. And conversely, we can look at the traditional iron triangle, and then we also have another fun triangle, which is the agile triangle. Now, this takes those traditional iron triangle values from the previous one, and they kind of are bundled into what's called constraints. So cost, time, and scope are constraints, and then we also want to take into account the quality of our work, which is very important. We don't want to just have a project that takes a long time and costs us a lot of money, but isn't actually good. And then finally, all that will come to the point of, okay, it'll be, we did it well, but is it providing value to our company? And is it going to improve efficiencies? Is it going to, increase ROI? You get the idea. All right. Like I said, more on the software development side of projects, but when we talk about in any internal transformation project, whether that's a new campaign or just like restructuring, we have a couple of things that are always going to be common to this. And most of those are from those triangles, but we have actually all of those values are what we saw previously, but we want to understand the value, the budget, the scope, and the time. And all of these key factors are going to be on the what of our project. What is the work that we're going to do? What is the goal that we're trying to achieve? What is the cost that we want to lower? All of these things. So whether you're talking about a software development, a new software you're trying to build, or a new policy that you're trying to enact. We have these core dimensions that we want to keep in mind. All right. Before we get into the best practices, I want to impress upon you this quote. All models, all communication frameworks, they're all wrong. None of them are the best, because at the end of the day, nothing is going to suit your unique use case exactly. Like, no, most of the time, each software, it's never going to be 100% to your use case. It's a book you read, it's never going to be 100% what you were looking for. All models are wrong, but we can use them. We can use these as tools rather than all-out solutions. We can use them as tools to propel us forward. And also, the core of most project activities are people. Even though we're building a new software, building the next Fortune 500 company, at the very first level is people doing work. And we want to keep that in mind, because although we can employ agile development, we can employ different frameworks of delivery, we're dealing with people. And people can be complicated, and people are hard to work with sometimes. Very hard to work with sometimes. And if we have a bad relationship with our coworkers, then all of these core dimensions that we talked about earlier, they're all going to suffer. Keep that in mind as we talk, and let's get to those not fun stats that I talked about earlier. So, it's come from a few sources below, but 70% of digital transformation projects fail. This is why I keep impressing upon you that what we talk about today might be some tips and methods that will make or break the project that you undergo. So 70% of projects internal to the company will fail. 40% of organizations experience cost overruns for global ERP implementation projects. There's another saying that I like to share about this time for this stat is that, who has heard the adage for software projects that are always over time, over budget, and under featured? There's a reason for this, is because software is hard, and running projects internally is really difficult. And then the final stat is that 74% of those projects run over our timeline. So over budget and over time. All right. Now, with that grim, bad outlook, let's shed some light on the matter. All right. We're going to get into that planning phase. So when we talk about project planning, first thing that we're going to look at is how big is our project? What's the scope of what we want to achieve? And we want to put on our future caps, and we want to try to think of every possible scenario that could happen and all the features that we might want to have to estimate what our work might be. And then we come up with a project execution plan. And then while we're going through the execution, you'll hear me say this word probably about 50 times, but documentation. Because not only if you document your problems, document your solutions, document your changes along the way, this is going to infinitely help future projects, because they'll have those mistakes documented and the solution. And we'll talk more about this. But for right now, this is kind of our project planning plan, if you will. And we'll move along to the scoping portion. Just to give a quick overview, this answers the question, why? Because our scope is always going to be in service of that final value that we want to deliver either to our team internally or our customers, it's going to be answering the question why. And not only is it going to answer the question why, but it's going to provide us a lens for changes that we can, if it's a client that we're delivering a project, then if you're, let's say, 2 months into a project and you get on a meeting with your client and they start talking about everything that you had not talked about and saying like, why isn't this here? Why aren't we doing this or that? We can refer back to our initial scoping plan and say, okay, are these things that you're bringing up right now, are they answering to the core features that we had discussed? Is this really how we want to shift the project? And that provides you that lens of saying, okay, no. Like, absolutely want to satisfy your requirements, but it seems like what you're saying is in contrast to that, and that can happen a lot. So it gives us that lens to handle those changes. And then, as I was saying, that we need to put our thinking caps, think into the future, and because it'll narrow the grand ideas as I want to have this, I want to have that, I want all this flashy stuff into concrete, small, actionable tasks. And so we can, if we want a beautiful new software application, we can say, okay, what modules do we need? What fields do we need to have? What data types do those fields need to be? And so it says, okay, here's this idea in the clouds, and it brings it to earth and starts letting you plant the soil or the seeds for the soil. You get, and then that final word, bring it up 50 more times, but documentation. And in here, I put that documentation should always be bigger than your team size. And the reason I say this is because everybody else on your team that you might be working with, they're not you, and they don't have your brain, so they don't know what you're thinking at any given point. And unless you have, I don't know about y'all, who hates like stand-up meetings for software? Yeah. I'm not a fan, because they're a 5 to 10 minute meeting. You most of the time don't know what you want to say. You're like, okay, no changes, still on timeline. Kind of, this is how it goes. But if we instead work in, for example, something like Zoho projects, then we can have our actionable tasks. We can comment on those tasks and say like, okay, I implemented this feature. Here's a screenshot of it. And here's a potential problem that I see in the future. And so we want to keep that in mind when we're talking about it, especially with sizes of increasing people. We always want the amount of documentation that we have to be greater than our team size. And that final point, more documentation equals less potential confusion, because let's say you were building a app in Creator, right? If you build the app yourself, you know exactly what the workflows are doing. When you click this checkbox, you know exactly what's firing off. But if you bring on another teammate to develop that Creator app, then unless they take, depending on the app size, 30 minutes to an entire two days, they won't know exactly what the app is doing and how it's doing it, unless you have some sort of guide or some sort of document that says, okay, when you fill out this form, here's everything that's going to happen. Because having to go through the code and having to go through all of these things is a time-consuming process and can lead to frustration when they do develop. And very often you'll step over each other's toes, and we don't like stepping our toes. All right. Zoho wants to help you. This is not just a product pitch, but this is like we genuinely try to think of everything that your business might need and provide you tools to do that. So for project management, we have Zoho Projects. And since I made these slides, we released Projects Plus. But we have Zoho Projects and Zoho Sprints. Zoho Sprints is more on the agile software development. But this last point, and is very important because is a pain point that I often will run into, is if we're working in Zoho projects, everybody needs to be doing their stuff in Zoho projects. I've been on a couple of internal projects where I've been impressing upon my colleagues to add their comments in the tasks in Zoho projects, and they end up just DMing me the answers because, especially on long projects, you're not going to want to try to search through DMs for answers. You're going to be like, no, okay, it was in this milestone, this task, here's the answer, right? It not going to talk about that example anymore. If you pick a tool, whatever, Zoho projects, Trello, Asana, whatever it is, it's very important that everybody uses that to document the project. And when we talk about procedure, we want to be having regular meetings, not every single day, because that will inevitably decrease the productivity. Because sometimes, especially with software, you could be working on a bug for an entire week and not have anything to show for it. And that's just how it goes sometimes. So regular meetings, but not too frequent meetings to where you're decreasing the productivity. There's that word again, documentation. All right. And then also, the reason I put realistic milestone is because we always want the next goals to be in service of that initial scope. And like I just mentioned, you could be working on a bug for a week, and which is absolutely okay. However, if you work on a bug for an entire week and we're on a team and you have nothing to say about it other than it's fixed, then we're also going to have a problem. Because if you work on something for a week, you will definitely have a lesson from it. Week or a month or whatever it is, you're going to learn things from that process. And so we want to know those things too, because as is the case, these things are going to happen again. These problems are going to come up, and they're going to have to go through that same process of solving the issue, going through the work, that hard, frustrating thing of solving that bug. And it's going to take them a whole week, just like it took you a week. But if you document that process of solving that bug, take screenshots, explain it very in-depthly, then when that person comes up with that problem, you'll be able to refer to them and be like, oh, no, I ran into this, a month ago. Here's how you do it, 30 minutes. Good. All right, perfect. When you talk about project delivery frameworks, like I kind of mentioned earlier, we have traditional waterfall development, so more on the line of that iron triangle where we have our requirements phase. We then design the entire application. We go into developing it, testing it, and then launching it. This framework is really good for kind of smaller projects, less scope, because we can kind of just iterate and go through. And then for agile and hybrid development, we're going to constantly be designing, constantly be testing, constantly be deploying, because this framework is more aligned to these, long journeys. In the case of, software products, you're always building, you're always adding new features. And so you want to constantly be testing, developing, designing, and have that iterative process. But when we're talking about small business and low scope, we want to go through that agile process of making small features here, like iteratively deploying them. When we go into more enterprise level, but still low scope, most likely our team size is going to be bigger. So we want a more deliberate method to it. So we want a big old design phase, big old requirements phase. But once we get to actually doing the work, then we can do those minute design details, minute testing, and then go about it that way. And then on the other side of things, for high scope small business, we more to have that hybrid agile, because big project, and we want to be able to do it in all small chunks. And then the final enterprise high scope is that traditional software development lifecycle. All right. Now, in this next section, we're going to go through a couple of do's and don'ts along the process, along the project lifecycle. And so when we're going through our requirements, when we're scoping out the projects, we want to try to exhaust every single possible scope. We want to reach for the stars. We want to think of everything that we might want to do, everything that our customers, our clients are going to want to have. What we definitely don't want to do is say, oh, we'll figure out how to plan out the login page when we get there. We just want to build the site first. And as things go, as sudden complexity arises, things are going to go wrong. So we want to be as prepared as we can be, but absolutely know that life never always goes the way we want it to, and things are going to happen. Best way to put that. And so if we assume simplicity, then we're going to get bombarded, and every change that the client presents, every bug that happens is going to be the end of the world. Rather than taking it in stride, we will just get down, take longer to solve it, and not have a good day. During the execution phase, we want to, in the case of software development, is test-driven development. So developing with the idea of testing it right afterward. Like I mentioned earlier, that word again, document your mistakes, because it'll make that process of solving it so much easier for the next person and decrease that time that future projects are going to cost and take. And do we really want to emphasize quality of the work instead of sheer output? Because does anybody use, I don't want to get into too many fights after this. Has anybody used Salesforce Lightning, for example? Did you like that? It's unusable in my opinion. And that's not just because I'm on the creator team. I genuinely, we did a presentation within our team where we did trials of other low-code platforms, and to make essentially the same app across the platforms to see how it would look and all that. And by far, everyone who tried out Salesforce Lightning was, yeah, it has a lot of features, it has a lot of things it can do, but unless you made it, or have somebody who made it holding your hand along the way, you're not going to know how to do it. It's not intuitive. Not to dig too much on Salesforce, even though, I love to do it. That's all I'll say. Don't forget about documentation. Anyway, so for wrap up and close, we want to continue that process of communicating, documenting. So we want to do user training. We want to sit with our clients and tell them how to implement the features that we created. In our close, we want to highlight all of the pain points that we went through, not just in the small tasks that we underwent, but maybe how those mistakes maybe snowballed into other mistakes. And so when we do these, we don't make those mistakes in the future. Final big do of the wrap-up phase is we always need to ensure that our final value that we present either to our team or to a client is, we want to say, more than the planned value. And this is why in the scoping portion of this presentation, I said, or I maybe not have said it this time, but we want to get the smallest version of the project and see what success looks like with the smallest version. Because if we promise the moon to our clients and we just end up giving them a souvenir toy, they're gonna be mad. They're gonna be pissed. So we want to, in that scoping phase, say what's the least amount of solution that we can provide, and then we want to go beyond that. Almost the saying of under promise, over deliver. We want to have that mentality, not only with who we're delivering the execution and the project too, but also with ourselves. Because if we have smaller successes and smaller wins, then the small fails are not going to seem so bad, and not make the milestone be the win. Make the small task be the win. And so if we do that, we'll eventually make sure that that final value is greater than that planned value. Shifting gears a little bit from the planning and execution, up to this point, we've kind of been talking about what we need to do and what should happen with that what. But as I mentioned earlier, all project activities come down to people and the person. And so we want to learn of the how. How do we communicate that the project's going to take another month? How do we communicate to our team members that I may have not documented as much as I should have when I really should have? And how to overcome those obstacles? All right, I'm going to take a quick sip of water. Don't worry about, memorizing this. We're going to go through this step by step. So moving along, this, just for reference, comes from the project management body of knowledge, just for references. All right, so before even getting into the specifics, when we go through a project, we want to know, this is why I said I don't like stand-up meetings. We don't want to just talk with nothing to have, nothing to give. We want to have a goal each time that we communicate, whether that is, hey, I did a really good thing. I finished this task. I closed this milestone. Or, hey, I messed up. I'm going to go about fixing it. And we want to know our audience. So, if that's our colleague that's working on the development with us, we're going to talk differently when we do that versus when we're on the meeting with our client. We're going to talk differently. And so we want to know our target audiences and how we're going to do it. Like I mentioned earlier, stand-ups, not always the best in my opinion. So meetings are not always the best way. We've all heard this could have been an email. And so we want to weigh what information and how to communicate that information the best. Quick little statistic before I move on to the next slide is just to keep in mind when you're thinking about this is 93% of communication is nonverbal. So only 7% of what you say is what is being communicated. And that's why the whole thing is like, oh, you can't convey tone through text unless you know the person. This is the reason why. At all, 93% of what people understand from us is going to come from our grand gestures and our intonation and how we say things, our phrasing. And only 7% is going to be the actual words that we say. You know this yourself, because if you've ever had a pet dog, you can, not saying people are dogs, just, whatever. But if you ever had a dog, you can look down the dog and in the nicest voices, like, I'm going to drop kick you. And if you say it in a high-pitched voice, they're going to be excited about it. It doesn't matter what you actually say. It just matters how you're conveying that information. And conversely, if you have your voice down low and you say you're going to give them a treat, they're going to think you're going to drop kick them instead. All right, moving along to this communication framework in the planning phase. So while we're scoping, while we're doing these dialing down our nice to haves, this is, we might have the most conviction in the world about this project, but this is the time where we're going to secure that buy-in, that initial contact. And so one of the reasons how we do this is we should be excited about it. I know that seems like a basic thing to say, but if you're pitching a new internal product or internal application, maybe on Creator, that you know is going to improve efficiency, but when you go to your supervisor, you go to your other colleagues and be like, yeah, like, I think this is going to really help us. going to be great. Our ROI is going to increase by 30 to 35%. It's going to be awesome. Who thinks that project is going to get greenlit? Yeah, not very convincing, right? But instead, if you're like, all right, guys, not be overzealous, but you go to your boss and be like, I really think this is going to improve our process. I have looked at it. I've discussed it with a couple of colleagues. We know it's going to really help, and we would really love to move forward with this and plan this out. Having that shift is one, believing yourself and establishing that vision. Like I mentioned earlier, people don't have our brains, thank goodness. But because people don't have our brains, they're not going to see what we see unless we tell them. All right. And for this initial phase, I put that, or the book has in-person and online meetings are probably the best method to communicate this, because of that example that I just had. Is you want to communicate how excited you are, how that vision is going to be implemented, and how it's going to, save the company or, increase revenue. And on the converse, the pitfalls. If we do that earlier scenario, they're going to probably leave that meeting with, okay, like, I'll think about it. They'll probably be the nice version. Or more likely, they're going to be thinking to themselves, this is just another meeting. I hate being here. I don't like this project. Even if it's, the next big thing in software. Going to be questioning why are they bringing this project to me if they don't even seem interested in it themselves? So these are the pitfalls just in the planning phase. I'm going to bring up that stat from earlier. 70% of projects fail, and I'd be curious to see what the statistic is for how many projects don't even get to executing that failed before they even start. Moving on to the execution phase. We want regular updates. We want document, right? We want to document. We want to be going along, and really, I keep saying documentation, but really all we're doing when I say documentation is you just need to put what's in your head onto a comment. You don't need some Shakespearean sonnet within your Zoho project task comment. It's a whole sentence there, but you just need to put what is happening, what's in your head. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's how I'm going about it. Put it on paper, so to speak, and infinitely better. And so when we're going through the execution and we're talking about either to our implementation teams or department head or our clients, we want to have a couple of different, and the different methods. Either we have meetings, not every day, right? Have regular methods of updates. So a lot of times you'll see the Zoho blog post. For product updates and stuff like that, you don't really need to establish the buy-in from there. So just the hard facts of what's happening is sufficient in that manner. So that's why I say just add the comment in your Zoho project or your, Trello card, whatever it is. Moving on to our pitfalls of execution. If you don't put what's on your head, if you don't update the project, the tasks, or whatever it is, then work is going to get duplicated, especially when you're talking about coding and talking about things that aren't always obvious as you do them. They're going to get duplicated and you're going to get frustrated. You're going to be frustrated that you're doing work that's already been done. Your coworker probably will be frustrated that, how'd you not know? Well, you didn't know because there's no way for me to know. This has happened a couple of times in instances of like creator projects, because within creator, we have the environment phase, but for developing itself, all changes that you make are going to reflect immediately. This is really good for testing things, but when you have multiple people working on a creator app, it can very easily become a stumbling block if you're not very apparent with what you're doing and what you are working on in that moment. So a quick example is your stakeholder wants some new fields added to a report. This is super simple. And so you have a couple of people on the team, and instead of having one person like pick up or assign themselves that new task, everybody just does it at one time. I'm sure this has happened at least in some capacity in y'all's day-to-day lives, but at that point, then you're hopping on an emergency meeting is like, why do we just change everything? It's like, it leads to frustration. It leads to everybody doing their own thing, which will make the project last longer. It'll make the project cost more. It'll have all those pitfalls. And transition is kind of that change management that I'm talking about, is when those problems happen, we want to handle that with grace, because inevitably things are going to happen that are wrong. And like I mentioned earlier, that's always going to happen. That's okay. But if you have nothing to say about it, then your users, your coworkers, they're going to want to not say anything, because every time I say something that I did wrong, then now I'm getting all the blowback from that. Mistakes are okay, but they shouldn't be repeated. And so some of the pitfalls from this change management, from the transition, is if we don't talk about these things, then we're going to give an unpolished solution. If we don't communicate regularly with our clients, then when we present them the solution, they're going to see things that they wish were there that aren't. They're going to be left frustrated. They're going to get a solution without any explanation. That's why I keep mentioning over and over, we need to handle these things with grace, and approaching it as a way of, hey, this is what happened. I know this is probably a really frustrating thing to hear, and be completely open about that, because I would argue that if you explain yourself, then people are pretty understanding. We sometimes, at least for me, I sometimes want to shy away from those things, because I'm like, oh no, I have to, be the poster. I have to be the perfect thing. But handling those things with grace is the objectively the best path forward, because mistakes will be not repeated in the future. You'll get better. Everybody will be moving forward from there. And then I know we're getting a little bit to time, but we only have a couple more slides. So talking about post-implementation, ensuring that final value is greater than that planned value. We're going to validate that ROI. We're going to see what problems we had, and we're going to learn those lessons. And this is where we're going to go to our final client and be like, hey, we finished. We are super happy to present this solution. You've been tracking us. You've been understanding what we're going through, and we really appreciate it. And here's what we have to show for it. So we want to have reports. We want to have user guides, like we were saying. We want to have that user training. And if we don't do this, the entire relationship between coworkers, between client, between everybody involved, the morale is just gonna drop. And most likely they're not gonna want to work with you for future projects. And if that's a client, that means that relationship might get broken, because all right, if the project didn't get dropped in the middle, and if it did see to fruition, then they're like, okay, golly, glad we're done with that vendor. We're not going to go forward from there. And I want to bring it back to this quote from the beginning, is that whatever we're doing, whatever delivery framework we're working with, we're dealing with people at the end of the day. All models are wrong, but some are useful. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with people doing work at the end of the day. So we want to handle those things with grace. We want to understand. We want to document everything. And we want to keep ourselves moving forward. because we can all agree that we all want to improve. We all want to keep moving forward. And so by doing these things that I mentioned in this project, we can do that. Some final stats before we wrap up. So 80% of projects with unclear requirements fail due to the project requirements and the value and cost. 90% of projects with estimates shared after design have met their financial goals. 60% of user-accepted testing feedback is avoided by providing feedback during the development. So, like, that's a really cool stat. It's like, okay, you're telling me I can skip out on over half of the flack that I'll get from this project, the bug reports, if I just put what's in my head during the execution. And absolutely. And then the final one, 75% of customer project experience delays. Software, like I mentioned earlier, software projects are always over time, over budget, and under featured. But if we think about the what of what we did today, the how of what we did, we remember what we're doing and why we're doing it. We have those core features and those nice to haves. We just might be able to move forward and continue. Thank you.